Good day, everybody. Welcome to the first of 3 webinar opportunities for Living Lakes Canada Indigenous-led water relationships within the Columbia Basin. My name is Michelle Sam. I am Ktunaxa, and I am hosting alongside a whole bunch of other people today. And so I just wanted to start with that welcome. This is what our agenda looks like for today, times and everything. For those of you in the Pacific, for those of you in Mountain Time, thank you very much for making the time to spend with us. I have some opening words for you, and it starts with a question. First, the question is, what does it mean to be Indigenous-led? And so for myself, I started thinking about that. We hear a lot of that talk about being Indigenous-led. What does that mean? And it means to be place-based, to know our place, to have our knowledge relationships guiding us, to be part of those knowledge relationships, because they teach us about our attachments to place, landscapes, and waterways, our roles and responsibilities for landscapes and waterways. And those are defined specific to our language and our culture and our location. Despite all of the ongoing colonial effects, right? The impacts of development, et cetera, we are still in somebody's homelands despite all the concrete. And so our intentions for today is to make time and space and place for Indigenous peoples to speak, and to make time, space, and place for non-Indigenous peoples and for Indigenous peoples from other places to listen and learn and appreciate where they are and who is leading, what knowledge is leading and informing, who does what and when and where and why and how. So today we follow Ktunaxa protocols. Even though we're online, we gather like we did in the creation story. And in the creation story, Napika calls all living things, Akamaskapikapsan, all living things together and says, the human beings are coming, what are you going to do about it? And they're gathered together with one heart. Uki with Yasha. I butchered that, so if anybody can say it better, please do. But it means one heart. And so we're not questioning each other's hearts. We're opening up our hearts to connect so that we can connect our thinking and our hearts to do good work together, right? But to be Indigenous-led means to sort of suspend our own disbelief about what we think we know and listen with intent to listen and to hear so that we can move forward together. So we're following those Ktunaxa protocols. So we set up this agenda with our speakers today. And I'm going to start us with the introductions. So like I said, my name is Michelle Sam, and I'm going to turn it over to Kat.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your words. I appreciate them. So my name is Kat Hartwig. I'm the Executive Director of Living Lakes Canada, and I'm very grateful and glad we have this time together for some deep listening so that we may learn from each other. So many thanks to all of you who've joined us today. Living Lakes Canada recognizes our collective work occurs within Indigenous peoples' homelands across what is now known as Canada. This webinar series focuses specifically on the area we know today as the Columbia Basin, which is the homelands of the Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, Syilx-Okanagan, and Sinai people since time immemorial. The intent of this webinar series is to support truth and reconciliation efforts through creating time and space for Indigenous place-based peoples to speak about the important and culturally specific relationship they each have with the waterways that continue to sculpt the landscape upon which we live. This is also an opportunity to rethink how we approach relationships in the future and how we may better apply what we have learned in our efforts to safeguard water that we and all beings depend upon. So on a personal note, I don't know if you can see the picture of the pond. Is that visible on the slides? There's a picture of the pond. Yeah, see that pond there? So I wanted to tell you a little story about this pond. And the pond is really important to me because not only is it beautiful and because it's nearby, but this pond is spring fed and it's open year round. So it rarely freezes. And it was used by the Ktunaxa people when they traveled up and down the valley on nearby trails. And the people set up teepees close to this pond, and there's still slight indentations of the teepee rings that are visible in the meadow near the pond. And I don't know the name of the pond, so my kids and I have always just called it the sacred pond because it feels that way. But I do go there every now and then, pretty much, well, every day, to visit the dipper bird that lives there. And when I go there, I get a chance to reflect about the peoples who were there like hundreds of years before I was, and to think about how they felt and how they might have lived, and on whose territory I now have the privilege to live. So I wanted just to share that with you. And now I'm going to go ahead and introduce the Ktunaxa knowledge holders. Oh no, actually, I'm going to introduce our team first. So go ahead, Emily, and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Emily, and I've recently joined the Living Lakes team. My role is the Applied Reconciliation Coordinator. This is a new and exciting role within the organization. It's very much evolving. My goal is to honor and incorporate Indigenous knowledges in our work in water stewardship. And next we have Nicole Trigg.
Good morning. As the Communications Director for Living Lakes Canada, I thank you all so much for being here in this amazing space. It's fantastic to see so many people join on such short notice, as we only announced this series last week. After hearing today's presentations, I'm sure many of you will have questions or comments. We will have 15 to 20 minutes for questions after each speaker. So please enter your questions into the chat box. The chat function is located in your toolbar. Emily will be watching the chat box and inviting those with questions to unmute themselves to ask their question out loud. We will do our best to get through all your questions in the limited time we have. And a recording of today's webinar will be emailed to everyone who registered and will also be made available on our website. Thank you again for joining us today. Back to you, Kat.
Great. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Emily. And so now I would like to invite the Ktunaxa knowledge holders to introduce themselves. So Jim, would you like to start?
Yes, Secwepemc. Good day, good afternoon. I'm really glad to be here. Jim Clarricoates. My name is Jim Clarricoates. My specialty has been fisheries for the last 20 some odd years, but as my role has expanded, and apparently now I'm a knowledge holder, so that's a good thing. I've transitioned into that zone. That's one of the rites of passage for the Ktunaxa, is to become that knowledge holder and share. So I really thank you for inviting me to do this talk today. Yes. Norman?
My name is Norman Allard. I'm the community planner for Lower Kootenay Band, That's my name that was given to me by the Ktunaxa people. I'm Secwepemc, French, and Mohawk. I've grew up in the territory among the Ktunaxa people. Our family's basically been adopted in. I keep being told that by a number of people, and trying to accept it. Today I'll be bringing forward a presentation on an Indigenous-led project for restoration and what it means to incorporate First Nations perspective in doing restoration work. And I'll be going through a lot of background and history throughout my project. So, but it eventually ties into why the project evolves that way through the Indigenous perspective.
Thanks, Norm. Apologies for that, went up a lot faster than I intended it to. I've had too much coffee, I think. So here's the agenda for this afternoon, just so you know. I know some people, they want to know when they're going to get a break because we're online, and so many of us spend all day online these days, eh? Right? Meeting after meeting after meeting. So we're going to hear from Jim we're a little ahead of time. And so we've got time for Jim for about an hour. And then when Jim's done, we're going to take a break and then we'll listen to Norm. Okay?
Yeah, that's kind of the perspective I wanted to begin on, was that storytelling piece. I'm telling two stories today. The story of the river and the waterways, as well as Ktunaxa, the Ktunaxa story. And like Michelle was saying about the creation, Ktunaxa creation, during that time when all the Syilx-Okanagan were called together, there were two guardians, one for the land and one for the water in those times. The water guardian was Yablunik, and the land guardian was Nasukan, or Nasmuksan, sorry. and the water guardian was being greedy. He started taking the animal people from the river's edge, and he was attacking them more and more often. So all the animals came together and formed a war party, and they were chasing Yablunik to find him and kill him. And Yablunik went south from where Canal Flats is today, went south. And there's a lot of different stories off of this about different waterways, but I'll just do a general kind of updated one. So he went south into Montana and then over to Idaho, came back into Creston area and to the Kootenai River, Kootenai Lake, and then out. He went north into on the Columbia towards Arrow and up to the Big Bend, which is north of, upstream of Revelstoke, British Columbia, that we call Mitskaka Amakas, Chickadee's land. And he came back towards Columbia Lake, and that chase went on and on, around and around, until one time they hear a little voice, but a big hearty laugh. He was laughing away, and they looked, sitting on the river's edge was the little guy, blanking his name, but the little guy, he was sitting at the edge of the river laughing at him. And they were like, "What are you laughing at, little one? You're not helping to catch and kill Yablunik." And he was laughing, "Oh, you guys are just so funny, running around and around and around. You're making me laugh. Well, do you have a way of, or do you think you can do better in catching Yablunik?" And the little guy said, "Yeah, Nasmuksan, you're a giant. With your big muscles and your giant hands, why don't you push the mountain over where the two river, and then you can create a dam, and the next time Yablunik comes around, he'll be trapped." So he did that, and they trapped Yablunik and killed him. And from Yablunik's organs was the creation of Syilx-Okanagan, the people. All the races of people were created. The float bladder was the people of white Caucasian. The roe was the yellow people. The eggs and roe were the yellow people, the Asians. The black was the liver, or the liver in the back, the real dark black part of the back of the spine. It was the black people, and the red people were the blood that was left on the hands of Nasmuksan when he threw them in all the different directions. He bent down, cleaned his hands on the grass. He said, "This is where the Ktunaxa will be." And then in their excitement and their joy, because the reason why all the Nasukan Syilx-Okanagan, the animal chiefs, were called together was because they knew the humans were coming in. They were finally here. So they were celebrating, and Nasmuksen stood up, and he's so tall that he hit his head on the ceiling of the sky and fell dead. And his body creates the Rocky Mountains right now. To the south, and in the Yellowstone National Park area is where his head lies, and his feet lie up towards some the Yellowhead Pass area. So when the Ktunaxa first stood up on the land, on Amak, on the land, they were given something by the Creator. They were told, you have lost two guardians of this world, the guardian for water and the guardian for land. And it is now your responsibility to uphold the health of the land and the waters. So that's the start of the story. If we could bring up the presentation. So that first thing the Creator told us is the start of what we call Aknumutstishis, the natural law. And through this natural law, through that first thing that he was told, that guided us on how to be with the land, how to be with the water, and our responsibilities for them both. Okay, so that's the start of the story, and that's why vitality lives here. The other story begins with the glaciers, the thousands and thousands of years of glacial grooving and smoothing and carving of the landscape. And these glaciers are essential to the formation of the way that the Columbia and Kootenai rivers move. I kind of bring three or multiple disciplines in here when I think about the glaciers. I think about archaeology, I think about fluvial geomorphology, and I also think about biology, because the glaciations affected all. And one of the main things was fish distribution. I find this very fascinating because the anadromous fish, white sturgeon, lives above an impassable falls called Boddington Falls. And that's between Kootenai Lake and Castlegar, BC. And these glaciers would melt and recede and create ice dams that would back up the water that allowed them to access. There would be breaches of ice dams upstream and downstream that created the perfect conditions for those fish to travel past these barriers. And that's why we see those long-lived creatures in the Kootenai River system right now, today. And then another piece is the burbot, which is really interesting. We have burbots are separated into different areas, or also known as clades. And through the research on restoration of burbot populations, we found that there are two clades in the Kootenai River system. There's the burbot that come from the Mississippi River Basin. They have genetics that relate to the Mississippi River Basin, and the other one is the Pacific Ocean. And this tells us that back in the glaciation, that the water that backed up was able to connect over these heights of land to bring those creatures, those fish species, to us. But what's really interesting is how they were distributed, and that was through elevation. because at Kootenai Lake at the north, there's Duncan River, and there's a lake up there. And those burbot in that lake have that Mississippi clade. But in the Kootenai Lake, it's the Pacific clade. And then after you get above Libby Falls in Montana, it switches back to the Mississippi clade. So it is real interesting, I find, how these glaciers really influence the distribution of fish throughout the Columbia and Kootenai Basin. And some of the fish, yeah, as I mentioned, sturgeon and burbot, but then the trout, rainbow trout, were closely related to the steelhead, and then kokanee closely related to the landlocked sockeye salmon. So we knew exactly where the sockeye were able to swim from the ocean. But then when that water dropped, they became isolated in those site-specific populations and adapted to the size of the system that they were growing. So that's how we got rainbow and kokanee. And then there's the coastal cutthroat, which is probably closely related to the Westlow cutthroat. I'm thinking the parental genetics for those Westlow cutthroat, because of the distribution during that ancient time. And salmon were still coming to the upper Columbia, right to the Columbia and Windermere Lake outlets to spawn. These salmon were the king salmon, the Chinook. They were the only species strong enough to swim that distance. And that was right up until the 1940s, when they used to spawn in those salmon beds. Yeah, and some of you may have been at one of the salmon festivals, and you would have been at those salmon beds. So that's how they distributed. Below, the reason why there weren't sockeye or steelhead that made it up there is because of a section of river between the Big Bend and Revelstoke, and even Golden, but I'll come to that in a few slides. Pardon me. Some of the fishing techniques that we used, you'll see a gaff spear, and these were used in canoes for larger species and also on river's edge. And these were kind of cool because the gaff head detaches from the rest of the spear and has a sinew tied to it so that they can fight those big fish and tire them out, kind of like angling would. And there were also ones that weren't tethered as such, and those ones were used for burbot fishing during the winter months. Burbot were extremely important source of nutrients in the winter months. So we cut pieces of ice out where we knew they spawned over and over again. And burbot spawn in giant writhing balls. There's at least 40 adults that writhe in this ball that secrete their gametes. And that's how they spawn. So you just jab your spear through and take them back up through the ice. The second hook you see on the right is a set line hook. And this was made for very large fish. This would have been one of the ones we'd use for catching sturgeon, and also bycatch of burbot, because burbot will also feed in the same areas as the sturgeon do. This third one on the left is another gaff, a different style. And I know you see metal, but it would have been like that bone hook with the 3 prongs coming back up. So it would be, you just gaff it like for burbot fishing or suckerfish. And suckerfish were eaten, but only when other resources weren't available. However, I got to tell you, they do make a good soup. Another fishing technique that we used, and this was mainly for the trout, the bull trout, cutthroat, and rainbow that are resident to the area. And this is a weir and trap. On the picture on the left, you'll see the backside of the weir, and it kind of tapers from one end to the other. And the second picture is the mouth of the trap. It's not quite complete at that point, but the mouth tapers in, and then you have the branches, the really soft bendable branches that touch each other in the middle point. So when the fish swim through, they can't get back out. This is a little illustration that I put together for a youth presentation on water. And I did make a mistake, as this should be oriented to upstream so that the fish coming upstream. So this trap and weir would be, these green lines would be the willow species nearby, and they'd be staked into the riverbed. And we usually did this where channels split, so that, you know, there was less velocity, more chances of pooling in one side than the other. But we do that weir fence on both sides to ensure that the fish are moving in one direction. One of the practices for restoration was, after we were finished fishing, we'd remove the traps and parts of that fence, but we'd leave those willow stakes into the gravels, and they would create that riparian habitat that is necessary for stream bank stability. That was one of the ways we practice our stewardship responsibilities. Another fishing technique is dip netting. And this is actually a picture of invertebrate sampling, but I put it in there as an example for what dip netting would be. And as I mentioned, I will be talking about the rapids of the Columbia River, and that's where dip netting would be utilized, is in with those rapids and chute areas. So this is kind of this is the upper Columbia, and these are approximate where the ice dams would occur. You'll see my hand down here, or the arrow. This would be Golden, or Golden BC would be this way. And this is the start of the reservoir influence. This would have still been river at the end of the Columbia wetlands. And this is the bush arm. And this is where it really pinches up. This is what we referred to as surprise rapids before the dams were put in. And this was an important, very important site. There's archaeological evidence of usage for thousands of years. And it's a canyon. It kind of folds into a little rock canyon where it would shoot, and that's where the dip netting would occur. I think there's some animations here. Threw that in for the youth presentation. But these were important pieces because in sections of the Kimbasket Reservoir, it's narrow. It's very narrow. So these ice dams would form and burst in rapid succession. And the only evidence that there was some glaciation that, or some ice dams that did last long, is around the old Ktunaxa Lake, and that's where my hand is right here. But from there are numerous different rapids, and these are the rapids of that same area. Let me see. I'll zoom in so it shows a little bit better. So all of these blue lines along the riverway are where these rapids were located. So as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 before we get to the Big Bend. And then another 5, 6, 7 on the way down from the Big Bend. And this was important because the velocity, the sheer velocity through this section down to Revelstoke was enormous. And that's the only reason why the King Chinook was the only fish that was able to traverse it. He was the only one that had enough energy reserves and strength to make this travel. Yeah, these were so bad that there's one of the rapids is called Death Rapids. And that's because there was between 1808 and 1837, over 19 people were killed in those rapids. Then there's another one called the Priest Rapids, and that was named because 2 priests that were traveling to the coast, they perished on that rapid. So that just kind of exemplifies how powerful that area was. So this also has implications for planning on salmon restoration, because now we have to understand that, do we allow other species to move into the area where the only one subspecies of salmon was able to make it before? We have to make these decisions, because if we add too many salmon at different times of year, we could over nutrify the system, and that could wreak havoc in the Columbia wetlands. However, it could be beneficial for bears, eagles, otters, beavers, all of those things. So these are some important considerations we have to consider in moving into the future. So this is the story about the Ktunaxa again. And these waterways have provided a natural partitioning, I guess, a selection of preference of food harvest. We had the upper Kootenay and lower Kootenay. And the lower Kootenay were very, very skilled with their boats. They had the sturgeon nose canoe. They were bird hunters. They were fishermen, but they also had their hunting territories. And they utilized the Kootenay Lake area and the lower Kootenay River, as well as the Columbia, right down to, I'm blanking that falls, but down into the States and right up to Muskaka, Amucus, the Revelstoke area. And then the upper Kootenay were more game harvesters, elk, deer. We went across the mountains for bison. But we also had the salmon at Columbia Lake, so we were able to get our full dietary needs that way. And we also had trade. But the reason why all those are important is because of these waterways. they provided the access for us to be in Alberta, to visit the upper Ktunaxa, could visit the lower Ktunaxa by just traversing over a mountain pass that these waterways have supplied to us. And for the long travels, like let's say you're in Cranbrook, you could go to the St. Mary's River, travel all the way to Castlegar and canoe that way. And to make it back, all you have to do is take one pass and you're on Kootenay Lake again. And from there, you could go to Jumbo Pass and be right back up Columbia Lake area. So this really tied our communities together, made us stronger, because we were able to do that inter-tribal change, but we are exchange. But there's also trades with external tribes. And that is the connection that connected us to Amakas Ktunaxa. And the salmon is an important piece, because you all heard of salmon people. And Ktunaxa are Columbia River salmon people. Thousands and thousands of people and many tribes up the river coordinated their ceremonies, their dances, their trade, so that they weren't pressuring the fisheries day after day after day. They'd fish, they'd process, they'd celebrate, and allow for that escapement. And every tribe knew how much to take. They'd coordinate, scouts would meet. We'd meet in those shared areas, what I like to refer to as visiting territory, where we all came together to visit. One of those places is Fort Shepherd, which is south of the trail. There was a massive camp there with the Secwepemc, Syilx, the Okanagan, and Ktunaxa. We'd meet there, we'd do our trade, we'd celebrate with each other. And we'd talk about the fish, how much we're seeing, what we should do because there's too many or not enough numbers. What are our plans? And the spiritual connectivity. These headwaters, they're a birthplace. And that's where the snow comes to melt. And that's a place of death as well for the snow, but the birth of water. And that interface, the importance of that interface. So a lot of our spiritual places are in these headwaters, which connect us from top to bottom and to all that's around us. So I'm not too sure what my time is here, but I whipped through my
You have plenty of time.
presentation. Yeah, so, since we have plenty of time, I am willing to take questions right now if anybody has any.
Emily, do you want to jump in there? Great.
Yeah, Kalish Fraser, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Jim. Earlier, one of your earlier slides, you had some images of the fishing tools and they were laying on tables and they had numerical identifiers with them. And I'm wondering if that means that those items are housed in a museum, or are those items with the Ktunaxa people?
They're with the Ktunaxa people in our repository.
Great, thank you.
Sarah Osadets, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Jim. with regards to some of the previous tools, and I won't even try to name them, but the ones that were more based with bone and wood and tethering, are those fishing tools still being used? I really enjoyed looking at that trapping method, and I think there's some interesting things on the coast that Indigenous peoples did along the same lines with the tide. But I just wanted to know if that's a traditional thing that people still use.
Oh, unfortunately not, because the damage that is caused by these tools and the depressions that the fisheries have experienced and will experience, we do not want to jeopardize them at all. So we're more contemporary fisher people, but yeah, every once in a while, throw a trap in a lake or into the creek to demonstrate to youth and to pass that knowledge along.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Valerie Evans, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Jim. Thanks so much for the talk. I really enjoyed hearing all of the information. And I think it was like, I missed it about the ice dams. Could you just maybe explain that again? How the ice dams, were you saying sturgeon could go over the Bonington Falls specifically, or?
Yeah, it would be due to backwatering in one instance from below the dam, and then a break of the ice dam above, which would create the water connectivity that they could get around the falls. A lot of it would have been around, stuff like boulders, where they have those, have the pools behind. They'd follow up like that.
Okay.
And that's how they would be able to get above there.
So it was kind of like a stepping stone, like the fish would go as far as they could, and then behind them, the ice dams would form around maybe some bouldery area, and then that would elevate the water. So they're like raised, like kind of like a canal system. And then maybe they could go further, and then that kind of continues until they're over the falls. Is that?
Yeah, that's pretty much
Okay.
how like the glaciation system from 100,000 years ago to like 15,000 years ago was, in geologic time, actually quite quick. So that progression was actually, in terms of that length, was actually quick in the way you think about it.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I couldn't quite visualize how that worked, so that was great.
Thanks for your question.
Next, we have George Green. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Jim. How are you? That was a great presentation. Thank you. And good to see you.
Yeah, you look very familiar.
I've done some IMBA planning work with you folks.
Ah, okay.
But I'm wearing a different hat, the Elk River Alliance.
Nice to see you again, George.
It's good to see you, Jim. Jim, those tools that you used, which were used for food gathering purposes, do you see any potential for them being used for monitoring purposes? And perhaps even with different species, such as those in Ktunaxa?
Yes, actually, there was a project that I was on back in late 1990s, a bull trout enumeration on the White River, and we used that kind of same idea of the fish fence and a trap. It was just modernized with metals. We pounded in, those T-bars, rolled out some chicken wire, or a little stronger gauge than chicken wire, but something 1.5 by 1.5 so that the bull trout couldn't pass through. So that strategy is kind of incorporated into, the new monitoring regime, as you can put it.
Thank you.
But yeah, I would think that, the more organic way of doing that work would be the more ideal, because you can also do that stewardship, the stewardship obligation piece of, leaving the land better than you found it. That's one of the principles that we live by. So thank you for that, George.
And thank you.
Justin Patterson.
Jim, when you were speaking about the distribution of the burbot subspecies, I thought you had said something about it was dictated by elevation. And I wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand. But if that is what you said, could you explain it a little bit further to a layperson like me?
That could be because the Pacific clay didn't come in till later in the glaciation periods. So the burbot were able to make it to the headwaters, but then there was also another freeze. So they were stuck in those higher elevations of the upper Kootenay River and the Duncan River or Duncan Reservoir, like that area. So they were trapped in that area above. And then the next one brought in the Pacific clay that where they kind of inhabited the lower elevations.
Thank you. That clears it up. And that's just so fascinating. I had no idea. So thanks for that.
Thanks for that question.
Martha Dippo. You're next.
Hi there. I was just curious, when I lived on the coast, they would take the ooligan and put them in the pits to make the grease. And then when I lived in Lytton on the Fraser there, that they would take the fish and make stuen out of it. And that's when you cut the fish and then dry it for how windy it was in the canyon. And I was just wondering, in what ways were the salmon preserved?
They were also wind dried, and then there was also smoking as well.
And how would they do the smoking?
I guess it would be kind of like
over a fire, kind of?
Yeah, inside of a structure.
Yeah.
And then it would be smoked inside that structure.
Right on. Cook's Jim.
So if there aren't anybody else, I'll just take a moment to address, and thanks, Valerie Michelle. Val, where are you? Thanks for responding to Ben. There you are. Hi. To respond to Ben, we weren't ignoring your question, Ben, but it's a big question, because the political landscape is such that Indigenous peoples, such as the Ktunaxa and the Secwepemc and the Okanagan, I would even say, we've been interrupted by that nation-state boundary. And then on top of that, in the United States, sovereignty is nation dependent, meaning the USA decides if you're a sovereign nation or not. And then they put you together with a bunch of other nations onto a reservation system. And so it's a very, very different and precarious understanding. It doesn't just equate like we're all the same. There's a number of systems that have impacted our ability to have, sitting at the same tables, because then, of course, there's the competition of those nation states on top of that. And so really for these webinars, we're really talking about the knowledge relationships we still have. And so as a Ktunaxa Xmaknik, I know that, I'm still connected to the Ktunaxa down south, right? We call them down south, right? But they're still all my relatives. Many of them came from up here and married down there, right down there, married up here. And so it's there's a lot more politics to that question. And so today and the rest of these, we're really going to look at our knowledge systems and we're not ignoring those questions, but those questions I don't even think have been really answered in any of the political tables either, but they're figuring it out over there. I hope that helps. Okay, well, if there's nobody else, does anybody else have a hand up there? I don't see anybody. And if we
another quick thing on that question from Ben, there are some groups starting to try and gather people across the border, and the International Kootenai River Habitat Restoration Team holds meetings where anyone that has restoration projects from Meander Reach all the way up to Kootenai Lake gather once a year to kind of do like a mingling of projects and make sure we know basically what's happening all along the Kootenai River. And that way we don't say, like my project that we're doing, that I'm managing with LKB, is adding unknown variables to other projects all along the Kootenai River. So it's starting to grow more and more, and that ideas are actually becoming, you know, pretty sought after to group a number of people together cross border. I've just started getting involved with stuff like that, so I don't know as much, but yeah, it is happening.
I'm only smiling, Norm, because you know, treason is sometimes an issue, right? When we're trying to talk to our relatives across the border, and depending on which hats we're wearing and so on and so forth, right? We have to be really, really careful, even though these are our blood ties, right? And we share responsibility. And, you know, for myself, you know, I go down south for ceremony. And so even with COVID, that impacts, right, how we can share, right, how we can continue to be who we are in our homelands. Never mind all these other, right, all those echoes out in the politics and so on. So thanks for that, Norm. And it's 5 to 3. Oh yeah, go ahead, Candace. I was just going to say we could take a break, but go ahead.
Nobody gets a break. Sorry. Thanks very much, Jim. I too was really fascinated by the genetic split in the burbot, and it's really, thinking across time and space is hard but fun. And I was wondering about, you know, I spend a lot of time on Kootenai Lake, and I really love Kootenai Lake. And over time, I've noticed a reduction in mussels. I used to see a lot more mussels in some of the more shallow areas, and I'm curious about historic use of other kind of aquatic species, you know, in addition to the fish. And if you or Norm have anything to offer, yeah, just about, always been curious about that. Thank you.
Yeah, there was freshwater mussels that were transported up to the Windermere and Columbia Lakes that piggybacked on the salmon. And the way that they piggyback is that, you know, the salmon, the larger salmon will feed on those mollusks and shellfish and stuff. But when they get close enough, they release their gamete, or their young, and the young get stuck in the gill plates. Wow. So when they come up to spawn, by then those young drop out. And then if you look at the northern end of Windermere Lake, if you snorkel through there, you'll see hundreds, maybe even thousands in that bed. But you know, one of the things that is affecting them is the boat traffic, though. That system is oligotrophic and lots of sediments. So every time boats come into those shallows, they cover them with that silt, and I'm really worried about them for that fact.
Wow.
The issue's not as bad on Columbia Lake. The boating traffic isn't quite as bad, but Windermere Lake is, yeah, it is being impacted. And that was that was an important food source as well. Not abundant, but an important one. It added that diversity for the nutrient consumption. And yeah, there's freshwater mussels up above Libby Dam too. And I was always curious about that one because there is no anadromous species that was above Libby Dam,
right,
before the dam was built. So it was always kind of curious to me as how they got there and how long they've been there.
right.
So yeah, one of the things that I was always thinking about is maybe doing that a genetics analysis, because I was thinking that it's possible that they could have been transported from the Columbia system into the Kootenai, into those certain stream beds as a aquatic farming source.
Oh, right. So human introduction.
So I'm going to interrupt here. Sorry to do this, but I guess this is my job, right? I'm going to suggest we take a break now for 15 minutes so that we can, Norm, we're going to just push it up for 15 minutes. So I see we've now got some more folks that have some questions, but I want to give just as much time to Norm because I know that after Norm is done, you guys are going to have more questions and maybe even flow across, right? So let's just take 15 minutes now. If you can turn off your screens and your microphones, and then when you come back on, I'll be back here, and then just start turning on your screens again, and then we'll know. We're going to start though right at 3:15.
Thanks everybody for those great questions. I look forward to answering some more if I can.
Thanks, Jim.
Did you see that, Michelle? I'm already back. No.
Oh, they've recorded us now.
Oh, and sorry, Linda, I didn't mean to not say hello to you as well.
So I encourage you all to look at all the different names. There's 6 pages of names. See if there's names of people that you know, right? And say hello. Even though there's Nadine, even though we're so far away from each other and we're socially distanced, it doesn't mean we can't still connect, right? We got to figure out those ways to connect. So we are now going to pass everything over to Norm Allard, who will be leading us through for the next at least hour. And then that'll give us a little bit more time for questions at that point, and Emily's going to be watching that for us. And so I'm going to stop sharing. Norm, you're up. I always think of this as the moment in Star Trek or Star Wars when they're all fiddling with all their dashboard stuff and they have 20 people helping them.
Yeah. So is that shared now? No. Uh-oh. Is that sharing now?
I can't see it. No, not yet. Now I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, my computer likes to be slow when I need it to be fast. I should have clicked it about 5 minutes ago.
So all we're seeing is a black screen.
Yep.
Okay.
Waiting for my presentation to pop up here.
Okay.
Like I said, my computer decided to slow down enormously.
It's like our children. They can feel our anxiety.
Yeah. Right. Let me just, oh, there we go. It's kind of popping. let me just stop this for a sec and then reshare. There we go. Is that working better now?
Yes,
Okay.
at least for me it is. I don't know about anybody else. Thumbs up if it's working for you.
Okay.
You can use your icon. Yeah, yeah. Can you all see it? Thumbs up. Awesome. Awesome, awesome. All right, Norm, you're up.
So my name is Norman Allard. I work with Clarricoates. We're currently undertaking one of the largest wetland restoration projects within the province, and among that, the largest in Canada. We're restoring 517 hectares of floodplain wetlands. We're working with Thomas Biebighauser. He's a wetland restoration specialist from the States, and we've learned a lot from him. And yeah, so like I said, mentioned before, I'll be going through a lot of the generalized points of the project and then telling how they relate to Indigenous perspectives. And yeah. Oh, my slides don't want to move. I got the little spinny wheel there. Oh, yeah, just there we go. So back in the late 60s, early 70s, up until 1985-ish, there were projects undertaken for creating compounds and impoundments for wetland management on Lower Kootenay Band lands. The idea behind these were the whole valley here where the Akanuki people are referred to as the Crescent Valley now, used to be a huge migratory staging area for birds. And on the plains, there was a lot of projects like this where they created these impoundments and made duck nesting habitat, and they tried to incorporate that here. But as Jim had mentioned, these areas, however many thousands and thousands of years ago, glaciers ripped through and created many different layers, so they weren't quite as successful as they were over there. In order to create a wetland, if you think of a pie dish, you have to create a perimeter and seal off the bottom. And in putting these impoundments in, they basically came and they put in dams in order to seal off areas. They used natural levees and higher elevations for the rest of the area for the perimeter of those wetlands, but the bottoms weren't sealed off. And because those glaciers ripped through, there's sandbars, there's gravel bars, there's everything where the water can seep out of these areas. So in these dams, this is a picture of on top of one, how it goes into the woods. They fail over time. Basically, they just become berms and they hold floodwaters out. That was one of the main reasons of keeping freshet during springtime when the snows melt and the waters run high. They'd keep these areas out because that wouldn't be very good for duck nesting habitat. And as you can see, a lot of the historical wetlands here, they were connected together. So they basically created these impoundments, and if you can think of them as bathtubs that could be filled and drained at will. And if you think of all of these historical wetlands as like tide pools, and if you connect all of those tide pools together, they all drain out at the same time, but they can all be filled back up. So that was the idea behind these, so they could get the water out, do all of the bulk of the work, and then they could be filled back in. This is the area referred to as the hunting grounds. And probably a bunch of people have heard whispers about this project. I've been playing it pretty close to the chest because it is dealing a lot with renaturalizing the project. A lot of people come in and they just breach these dams, they let the water in and back out, but they don't take care of the work that was done within the interior of these projects. As you can see here, there's a number of things that affected these floodplains. The water's controlled now by the Libby dams. There's still enough level that we do get flooding within there. This area, back in the early 1900s, a person named Bailey Groman actually connected the Goat River to the Kootenai right here and dug a channel through and cut off 15 kilometers of Goat River. It used to meander and parallel all the way up to Duck Lake, a paralleled Kootenai River. So that sent head cuts up the streams, which dropped the level of the bottom. If you think of, I've got a picture of the head cut here. Head cuts are like Niagara Falls. The bottom of these systems where all the rivers are always want to meet at the lowest level. Niagara Falls is a head cut, they control the flow so it doesn't erode back. But because these are all fine glacial till soils, these head cuts can rip through in a matter of decades in these areas. So what a head cut does, it'll drop the level of the creek or the river, and then it'll widen it as it sloughs in. So in doing that, it basically creates a massive zipper that undoes these wetlands, and it lowers the water tables and they become drained. So go back to where I was. So in doing, connecting those, the Goat River was a bit higher elevation than the Kootenai, so that sent head cuts up all of the channels, the main Goat and the south channel. So what they'd also done was they put in a 2-kilometer dam here, and all of the levees here were high enough elevation that they didn't need to dam it off from the flooding, and then they were having major problems on one of the inlets here. So, and to shorten the work, they also dug a ditch from one loop of the south channel to the other part of the channel here and cut off 1.2 kilometers of historical South Goat River. And this is a look at that channel. Normally it wouldn't have been, like, it wouldn't have looked this deep in the beginning when they dug it out, but over time, because of those head cuts, it made it deeper and made it look wider. So when you look at historical photos, all of these channels are about half the size of what they are now. So this is a shot of the upstream looking west. So, and then the other side, this is looking east from the other end of that loop. And like I said, these head cuts form the way up the channels. So, and in looking and explaining some of this work they had done, like I mentioned, all of these historical wetlands that were in the area, this is a design plan from the beginning of these projects. They were all connected, and they created these massive mounds of dirt that they turned into, they were calling nesting islands, because this area was meant to be filled with water completely, and these islands would be there for ducks and other waterfowl to nest on. And the size of these are about 18 meters by 27 meters, and they can be up to 3 to 4 meters tall. They vary in size depending on the amount of ditching. They had to put all of that soil somewhere, so that's the idea they came up with. So they put in this, this is their submitted design, but their as-built was this yellow line. This was a dam that they put in place. And they also dammed off this portion here, because that was another major inlet for the Goat River that used to access and fill these wetlands. And they were having such a problem with this that they actually channelized the Goat River. They cut off and dammed the upstream level here, and they cut a channel through to the extra loop here, which isn't very good because that speeds up the erosion for these systems as well, because that meandering of the rivers is what actually slows it down. And when you put straight shots into these, it speeds these systems up. you can't compress water. And if you force these all into one little area, they're going to speed up and go through, but which is not very good for the river system, but for the project, it was good for us because they left this bottom channel open and it created a backwater effect into here, which I'll show you what we used for later on in the presentation. So this is just a quick satellite image from, you can see this on Google Earth or Google Maps. Google Earth is good because you could play with the time slider and see all of the work we've done. And each one of these green dots is one of those massive islands that they created in putting all of the ditching in order to drain all of these wetlands from the east all the way down to the point over here on the west. And across the creek is where the pump was that they used to fill these areas with. And then they put in crossings on this loop so that they could access different portions of the project with their heavy equipment. So this is kind of a directional flow to show you how all of this water exits the system into this one point. And that's what I was mentioning earlier with the tide pools. You connect them all with ditches, the water goes down, they're all going to drain out as soon as you let the water out at one point. And this is the dam systems that they put in place. They blocked off a major inlet on the west here. They put in a dam along all of the levee of the South Goat Channel and blocked off major inlets along the actual Goat River. So you could see this is the portion that they blocked off and they channelized. And if you go through that slider system here, there was major floods in 2018. There's pictures from 2009, I think, that show, I think this is an earlier one from there that shows 2009. But after those major floods, it scoured out about a whole hectare of land right here and created a huge pond, a deep pond. And that's part of the destructive level of, you know, what water can do if you're not careful with it. And this is that channel that I was mentioning earlier in the blue line. And this is that cutoff channel that they disconnected. And in restoring these systems, our goal is to actually, and we've done so far, is reconnect that channel and have that flowing again. So we've put in place a couple of low water crossings, which act as riffles, which gives the community access back to these areas as well. Because this area, it was referred to as Anacham Namke, which means where the people hunt. All of these wetlands, there's such a natural, rich resource of materials and foods and everything for the people that if they were falling on hard times in the rest of the valley, they were always guaranteed food stores or materials from the wetlands here. So that's why it's referred to the hunting grounds. And over the time that people existed in these areas, you know, we think back, you know, it was accepted, like with the Bering Strait theory, it was 14,000, and then down in the States, about 200 kilometers away from here, there were tools that dated back to 17,000 years. And now there's evidence that just recently surfaced that show people being in North America back to 22,000 years. You know, a lot of this is starting to add up and show that we were here for extremely long periods of time. The same amount of populations lived within these valleys and within these areas. We didn't have grocery stores. We depended on all of these sources for our food, our clothing, all of our materials. And in order to keep track of that, some of the way they did that, say like with hunting, they had the, down here in Yakanuki, I know, it might be the same other places, but they had the duck chief, they had the deer chief. They had all of these other chiefs, which were the equivalent of specialists that learned and understood the life cycle of all of these plants, all of these animals, and how they interacted. They all held council and they managed all of these resources for the people, because if you over harvested, your tribes would become they'd have hard times for years and years to come until that resource recovered. So they all gathered together and they had these meetings and they watched what was happening with each, and they understood if something was wrong with one animal or one plant, that how it would affect down the chain through everything else. So that's the kind of indigenous perspective that we're bringing back into these projects. I've noticed, like I've been lucky enough that I manage these and I haven't had a specialist in any, I haven't had a specialty in any of these fields. So I've been able to bring a lot of different specialists through on different tours and listen to what they're saying and incorporating that intricate, how would you say that, interplay between all of these fields back into this, and knowing that we had all of those specialists back in the day and relying on some of those people that still had some of that knowledge of these systems, and realizing that and relearning it, we could also preserve what we already have for knowledge. We can also start to relearn some of those systems and bring some of that knowledge back in here. And because these areas were cut off, it actually degraded all of these systems. And in reincorporating them back together, we're starting to see more booms in populations, which means more people can go out and learn these things. There's language tied to this. Everything had a name. There's practices in gathering it. There's practices used by, in ceremonies from some of these materials that are out there. There's feasts, there's, everything tied with anything you can find out there is culturally significant. So in bringing back these populations, we're actually creating a place where more people can go back out and start learning it. Whereas the traditional view is we always took what we needed, we didn't take anything more. And because these populations dwindled, only a handful of people were able to go out and harvest certain things. So in bringing that back, we can actually start preserving that culture. So, and this is another thing that we started doing, is looking back as far as we can, even with aerial photos. This is a photo from 1929, and you can see here, this is where the Goat River used to do a 90-degree, and that's where they cut it through over to meet the Kootenay now. And you can see the size of these historical wetlands that were out there. And some of the work that had already began in trying to hay these areas and turn it over to agriculture. But this is probably like one of the best views of the area that we got. I geo-referenced all of these photos and we just threw them in Avenza so we could pull them up in the field. And as we're walking with our phones, it'd be like, oh, this is a historical wetland. We need to mark this off and get this reestablished. And as you can see here, bouncing back and forth, this is where the goat actually connects to the Kootenay now. And you could see all of these basins of these massive wetlands that were out there. Some of them are a little wet still, but this large one over here just would dry up by the beginning of August. And going out there and looking at it at those times later in there, you just see tiny little spike rush growing in these huge basins of like a huge, massive ephemeral wetland. So in 2019, when we began the project, we actually took out that entire dam and we renaturalized that levee as much as we could. Certain portions of it are left there still so that we can retain certain amounts of water within there. But if you look at all these green areas, those are historical wetlands that we went back in and started to reestablish. And this was one of the first steps in reconnecting these areas back that we've done in 2019 is when we began this project. 2020, we went back in with further funding and expanded the restoration of all of those wetlands and restoring the massive rims of those historical ones by taking out all of those islands and replugging that ditching, but we left them in as spillways. We didn't block them off completely. And in this area to the right, that's where the channelized goat was that I mentioned. We were lucky to have that back flooding into this area. And that's where we put in our main inlet for the project, so that the Goat River only needs to come up, I think it's like 20 centimeters now, and we can flood the whole area. And we restored all of those natural channels that appeared behind it. Inlets are the way that the river systems and creeks actually access floodplains. It doesn't actually, the river water levels don't just come up and flood over the banks all the way along. These are old abandoned oxbow channels of the river systems, as it used to meander all over the place. And these inlets are usually found on the outside bend, and you can see a lot of these channels, like they look like old creek beds behind them. So we restored those and utilized them to help fill the area. So that fills all of these massive wetlands now. And this is when we'd gone back in this year and we did all of these blue areas to finish off the project and basically button it up. So this is about 1/3 the area of what we're working on. This is, I think, 216 acres. And now we're basically at the point where we're just sitting back and monitoring what happens with it. In doing these we phased out a lot of the work in these projects. So we go between 4 different areas and we do work in each so that we can be able to go back to the previous year and look at that work and see what's, if something's not functioning properly, we can fix it because we'll be in the area again doing the work. And we can also incorporate all of the successful portions of it and continue that on. And we've built like an adaptive design system. So we're continually ahead of we use excavators and dozers to do this. So we're usually about 2 or 3 days ahead designing all of these wetlands and creating them. But what happened to set us on this path was back in 2018, we began this project. We'd restored a lot of the historical wetlands, and we actually were digging into higher areas where there are canary reed. And we plugged off one ditch over here, which created a 7.7 hectare wetland. And that got us thinking on, if we start doing with things like that, we can restore the rims of these massive wetlands and get a lot more restoration for the amount of work that we do. And in order to move into these more sensitive areas back in 2018, we basically had to show how these work and get buy-in from the band and all the members as well. And then in 2019, when we started the hunting grounds, we moved to a place, this is the Middle Marsh down south, and we restored all of these blue areas with wetlands. And then and this was the picture that I showed earlier with all of those squiggle ditches. We started disabling those ditches in this work. We still have a lot more to go in and do and disable a lot more to restore the larger rim of these historical wetlands. And then this is the furthest south. This is close to the US-Canada border. In 2020, we began the work in here and restoring a lot of the wetlands in here. And then this year we were back and did the same amount of work. We average about 6 to 7 hectares every year in each area. So total of anywhere from 14 to 21 hectares, depending on how much funding we have for that year. And eventually we are submitting plans and seeking funding continually to do this work. And we will have these other areas open to the flooding like we did with the hunting grounds. But what we've learned from that is if we open it up too early, it becomes too wet and we can't get in and take care of all the work that needs to be done within the interior of these wetlands. And secondly, it also lends to another endeavor that's being put on throughout the valley, is fighting off the American bullfrog, because our wetlands go all the way up to the border, and they always pumped into these areas. They were wet, so in order for us to get into these areas, we don't pump into them anymore. So as you drive in along the highway, you may see these areas dried up, and that's helping with that massive endeavor that a lot of people have undertaken in keeping the American bullfrog out, which is invasive and pretty destructive. So this is one of the excavators that we used for the project. We usually have about 3 to 5 pieces of heavy equipment, 3 excavators, 2 dozers is the most we had. And this is when we'd started renaturalizing that levee and taking out that dam. As you can see, we're about halfway down. I don't know if you can look close enough on the measurement stick. I think this is about this is about 1.5 meters or so, somewhere in there. And as we take this out, we have the dozer come behind with those windrows, and we'll spread them out. And as you can see here, this is a island in the background. And like I was saying, this is about 3 to 4 meters tall. And then this is the side that's about 26, 27 meters long. And this is what it looks like after we start restoring these areas. This is, I think, a year later with some of them. When we dig these these wetlands out, it's actually like bare ground, but because there are patches of native plants there, we leave those in place, and they help reseed and reestablish the vegetation there. And there's also seed banks within the soil. Some of them can last up to 40 years, and they're still viable. So we never have problems with reseeding and planting with any of the natives within the wetlands. So we vary the bottoms, and that way it develops different plant colonies, because all you need is one elevation across the board for one plant that exists that can take over that whole area. And as you can see here, that's what I was mentioning. We dig out these wetlands, but we'll leave these large patches of native species there to help reseed them and reestablish. And this is, you can see these areas where the whole valley has a really big problem with canary reed grass. And you can see how much our work does to fight off this. It's basically a hard line between these native species that have come back and the canary reed. So another thing that we do to combat this invasive plant is we take a lot of our spoils, we have to put it somewhere, right? If you dig a hole, if you think of that pie dish that's already full with a pie, you have to take that out and move that pie somewhere else. So we pile it on these other, the elevations where all of this canary reed exists. And within 2 meters out there, difference in elevation, you have your all of your aquatics, then you have native species about 1 meter up, then you start to see a lot of different plants around the wetlands. And then 1/2 meter up above that, you see this canary reed layer. And then another 1/2 meter up is where you start to see all of these native grasses and stuff start to reappear. So we're trying to match that elevation and get rid of as much canary reed as we can. As you can see, a lot of things start to utilize these areas right away. And you know, this is a bit of nibbling from animals that have gone through and start to seek these areas out for food. And this is wetland about a year after construction. I wish I would have took a picture of it before. I have them somewhere, but you know, I've got about 4 years worth, which is like, I think I'm up to like about 6 gigs worth of pictures and videos that I have to sift through and put together. But yeah, we have no problem with these areas holding water and retaining, because we do seal off these areas of the bottom of them. And this is what an ephemeral wetland looks like out there. These are really critical habitat. In the beginning of the season, this is what fills up with snow melt and sometimes freshet comes in and floods these areas and fills them up. And this is where a lot of the first plants start to emerge, where all those animals that hibernate or have gone away on migration come back and seek food sources. This is where a lot of the bugs start emerging to feed smaller animals that move all the way up the chain. So, and you can see there's like, this is just another example of what happens when you dig these areas. They just take over, because this is a perfect elevation for all of those native species where the canary reed doesn't like it. More nibbling, a little bit of a snack thing going on here. And another shot of a pond that, if you look at the bottom closer here, all of these plants are critical for the ducks and geese and everything. So they've basically come in and eat as much as they could, but there's still enough for them to grow back year after year. So, no, I'm getting fairly close, but this is that backwater area that I was talking about where we opened up an inlet. And this is a quick video to show you how important this work is in incorporating Indigenous perspective and reconnecting everything. These floodplains have a huge interplay with the river systems, which feed the lakes. There's a nutrient exchange that happens that provides food for everything out there. And in disconnecting these floodplains, you take away those food sources, like Jim was saying, for the burbot. These areas are full of copepods, which are an extremely important source. And to go back to that, working with across the border, we work with Kootenai Tribe of Idaho now on the fisheries they have there. And we're starting to release the burbot within the wetlands themselves where that food source is. They've narrowed down the lifespan to pre-feeding and post-feeding, where if they do releases in the rivers and streams pre-feeding, there's a low survival rate. Whereas if they develop them in the fishery nurseries longer so that they're able to eat and digest food, there's a higher survival rate. But during freshet, there's that cold snap that causes the spawning events for burbot. And those little fish, the fry, get washed into these systems where there's about a 10-degree differential in temperature between the streams and the wetlands, where they develop past that stage into a state where they could survive better. And this is, hopefully this plays. It's supposed to click and play. Click too many times again. I got the little spinning wheel. But in reconnecting these systems and putting them back together, that's what they're trying to do with all the fertilizing on the Kootenai Lake. They're pumping all of that stuff into the streams to recreate these events, to bring back all of that importance. So they're trying to mimic what happens here, but if we can do that naturally, it's a much better system. And it's so intricate on its own that, yeah, I crashed my computer. But let me just see if I can get that back. I'll stop sharing for a second here, let my computer catch up. But in reconnecting these systems back together, that not only naturalizes these areas and puts it back to what it used to be historically. We'll never have the same flows as we did back in the day. There used to be up to 22 feet of water on the plains here. Sometimes the Kootenai River would actually reverse its flow. We can't get those levels back, but why that last video that I tried to show you is so historic is because that was this spring. We had 80% snowpack in the mountains. We had such low water levels that came from those that we managed with that one inlet to fill this entire area and turn it into one massive wetland again, which as freshet goes back down, all of those historical areas hold that water. We restored the rims of those. Remember, as I would kind of call them tide pools, we restored the rims of those so that they're no longer connected with ditching and they hold back all of that water. I need to show that though. It's a cool video. Let me know if it starts playing.
Yep.
Is it all choppy for everyone?
Not for myself. It's moving.
Okay, yeah, it's a moving picture show. We'll just call it that. We'll be a bit old timey with it. But you can see these whole areas that used to dry up over time. They'd only be filled with a little bit of seepage from the river systems and a little bit of connection and snow melt and water now have full access to those systems during freshet. I'm trying to get over to the next slide. I'll just skip to it manually and then reshare. Yeah, this is what I have a problem with my slideshows, that I try and cut out all of the pictures from them that I was mentioning, and I end up getting some of the key ones I cut out because it becomes too big and it freezes up on me. So
Yeah, it's one of the challenges, right? The technology is supposed to be our friend.
So I won't play this video, I'll just show this picture. And this was looking, this is from the east side looking, or this is from the west side looking east. And this was 9 days of connection over 2 weeks this year. Normally this whole area would be underwater and it'd be almost like one massive lake. So with the low snowpack, we're able to almost guarantee that they're going to flood every year. We only need 20 centimeters and we'll start to mimic those fall floodings again that we used to happen naturally. We're almost at that point right now. I think we just need, we need to get back some of those heavier rains that start to happen in the fall. And just to show you, that picture was, last picture was taken over there. Now we're looking at where we just were from the air. I took this photo yesterday. And these areas over a massive year of drought and heat still retain water. We're actually recharging these ground systems and ensuring that they'll function into the fall for those migratory seasons and such. So yeah, I'd just like to, mention a couple other things. Like, of course, I got to mention some of the people who helped make this possible. Lower Kootenai Band is really key in this because ever since the mid 80s, they dedicated 12,000 hectares or acres to remaining wetland. Sorry, I kind of go back and forth between hectares and acres, but which is this 517 hectares. And that's why these projects existed back in the days, because they tried to manage these areas through a lot of the systems that were put in place, like the dams and the ditching and the pumps. But now we're starting to realize that without managing these areas and continual upkeep on them and the capacity, they degrade fairly quickly. So putting it back to as naturally functioning as possible not only benefits these wetlands themselves, they affect the streams, the rivers, and the lake. I'm lucky to be able to work with Lower Kootenai Band and be involved with this project and part of their vision in keeping these areas. Like I was saying, it's so important to their culture and central to their identity. They were people of the wetland. Of course, a lot of funding came from like Columbia Basin Trust Ecosystem Enhancement Grant. That's how we started these projects, along with AFSAR, the Aboriginal Funding for Species at Risk, Fish and Wildlife Compensation Canada, Wildlife Habitat Canada, Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, BC Columbia Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources, Operations and Rural Development, Fortis BC, British Columbia Wildlife Federation, and the Healthy Watersheds Initiative. I know we hear a lot about these things, but I just like to say their whole names instead of just a bunch of letters. I know it'd be faster to go through it, but I'd also like to talk to some of those things about updating that Indigenous perspective. Jim talked about how they used to crack through the ice in the wintertime and they'd harvest the burbot within these areas. And that's what's referred to nowadays as fish stranding. So that's a big issue that we have to deal with in these areas, letting these fish back into them. And then as freshet goes down, it actually cuts off some of, like a lot of those fish make it back into the system, but some of them are left behind and then there's a winter kill, and some of them survive also and grow and make their way back into the system the next time these rivers connects. But that was a natural process, and that was, you can verify that through a lot of the stories from these elders of how they used to go out and, like Jim was saying, cut through the ice and harvest a lot of this burbot that is now referred to as stranded within these areas. That was a natural process. There's big worries about the blue heron in the area. They're starting to return back to this. We've had about 5 or 6 within these wetlands. Those fish that get left behind are important food sources for that. So these processes all lend to one life cycle of something else. And that's what the Indigenous perspective that we're bringing to this project is incorporating all of that traditional knowledge and how everything, all of those life cycles depended on one another, not just separating the listed species out and building habitat just for that. If we build everything and naturalize it, it actually functions better as a whole. It also brings back populations of non-listed species, which, only make their way up the chain and bring back better habitat. I'll ramble on forever. That's part of our traditional ways of, there's so many different things to talk about this project. I try and bring up different aspects of it through every different presentation. So, and eventually once, this dark cloud that's over everybody lifts and we're able to gather again, through some of these organizations, we can group together and tour some of these projects and have like better talks about what's happening with the area and what we're doing with this project. So, I don't know if that's my time or not.
Oh, you still have a bit of time if you want, Norm, so you can keep rambling on if you like.
Maybe we'll switch to some questions. I keep seeing them pop up.
Yeah, hang on one second though. I just want to, before we go into questions,
okay.
I want to acknowledge, Norm, that there are at least 3 generations of your family on this call. And so I just wanted to see if your mom, Natalie, if your mom is still there, I want to offer your mom a moment if she would like to, if she's there. Natalie, are you guys there? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but I just wanted to acknowledge, right?
That's so cute.
What would you like to say about his work, honey?
I want to say something about the stewardship principles, part of the work.
Yeah, we're having good sideline conversations. So I know she's very, very soft spoken and she's put on the spot. So she's even being more shy right now. But she was saying that it's really awesome to see all of her son's work. And, especially in regards to all of, our natural laws and all of the stewardship principles and everything. And, she's very, very proud to see him breathe life into all of that work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think it's so important to make sure that, you know, we're not just talking about Indigenous or Ktunaxa knowledge relationships, but this is evidence of that, right? This is how we do it, right? We bring it together, our family, we acknowledge, and you know, like, I'm really happy that you get to see what your son's been doing. It makes me really proud too, that you were able to join us today. And so I just want to acknowledge you too and thank you. Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, the first question comes from Sarah Audit. Unmute yourself. You can send your question our way.
Thank you. My last name is Osidets, but that's okay. Most people get it wrong. Yes, I had a question. Obviously, there's some downstream impact to the Goat River no longer flowing beside or away from the Kootenay, but is there an impact of it with that erosion, its connectivity? It was just like an offhanded kind of seeing from 1929 to now that it's married up with the Kootenay, if there was downstream impact to that.
Yeah, the historical level of the Goat in the South Channel are actually lower than they used to be. That's why we were lucky to have that backwater effect in that channelized portion to connect to. We did open up a number of inlets along the Goat, but they were too high. And we actually had too much water this year, so they became outlets. And we went through and did a lot of work to block those off because they started eroding and sending head cuts all the way back into the water itself, or the wetlands themselves. So yeah, it does have an effect on how we get the water back into there. So we have to really watch our elevations. I have a background in GIS, and I have a GNSS receiver, which is a survey level GPS unit, and I can get up to 1.6 centimeters accuracy with it. And that's what we use to mark all of our elevations with. And we err on the side of being a bit too high. That way that's why we phase these projects out too, so we can let little bits of water in to see what it's doing, and then continue the work on reopening the rest of the areas so that, you know, we're not creating new areas, not letting the river system erode itself all the way through these areas. A lot of these inlets and outlets we've set at, like I said, key elevations, so that they're only accessed and there's only one flow of direction. And they have like 0 drop in elevation from where the water is all the way to the wetlands. So there's minimal chance of erosion.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the comment about how important it is that a river system meanders. It just impacted my, like, the way I see the landscape instead of just kind of a straight shot. That was, I mean, all of what you guys are sharing is really valuable, so thank you.
Thanks.
Alvin Beebe, would you like to share your question?
Hi, Norm. Thanks for the presentation. It's really super interesting project, and it's great. It's really great to hear you talk about it and the depth of knowledge that you have about the work that you're doing. It's really interesting. A question about the Goat River in that area. I know that there's some ice jam flooding occasionally during the winters, and I'm wondering if the hunting grounds receive if there's ice jam flooding or if it's just the freshet flooding and potentially fall flooding.
Well, these areas are, if you think of like pipe systems, now that these rivers are basically locked into the path that they're in right now, and that meandering is gone. Like I said, water, you can't compress it. So having all of the, like if we have melts and stuff for the winter time that add to these ice jams, there's no real way for this water to go. So what we're essentially doing is the equivalent of flooding our basement, right? In opening up these inlets, it creates areas for this water to go and have a release point, and it adds that slowdown back to the systems that used to be there and helps put a pressure relief on those things like the ice jams and the actual flooding. Say if we do get lots of water out there as well, I know a lot of people in the area end up having flooding problems in their basement because there's too much water. So in giving different areas for this water to go, we help alleviate some of that. And that's something that we're looking at as well and studying. Hopefully it pans out that it is a key benefit of this project. And that's another thing we have to do is continually monitor everything we're doing. And that's why I kept it close to the chest and not really presented this until we know that a lot of these systems are functioning and we're being successful, is because you know, we can always say we're going to do this and that, and then the whole project can go sideways, and it's a lot of proof of concept. So we're continually monitoring and then going back, like I said, with further funding and adjusting to mitigate any damage that may come from the work that we're doing, if that makes sense.
Amy Watson, oh, sorry.
And we're also adding in the successful stuff through the continual phasing, and that's the adaptive portion of it. Sorry, I'm good.
Amy Watson, I see you have 2 questions. Maybe you want to pick one? And yeah, head on.
Sure. Picking one. Ooh, I won't be greedy. The one I'm most curious about is how do Libby operations, excuse me, affect this work and the future of this work?
It gives us a semi-predictable water levels throughout the years. And then we can aim a lot of our inlets and outlets to match the elevations to kind of connect these areas back again. Like historically, like I said, the whole valley, I think it'd probably be like the 10-20 year flood levels. There'd be up to 22 feet of water. You know, you'd have massive amounts some years, and you know, those are regulated by the dams and a lot of the things that have been happening with climate change now. So having a way to look throughout history and see the fluctuations throughout the year, then we can start to kind of predict, yes, this elevation is the 2-year flood. If we put it at this level, if we raise it a bit, then it'll only flood with the 5-year flood levels, and so on and so forth. So we basically try and add a diversity as well back to these areas. We're not going to have them all the same, because this whole valley, you know, was one big diverse floodplain. And if we do certain areas at different levels, like within that cutoff loop that I'd mentioned, there's still the channel that they dug that connects it. So essentially reconnecting that turned that back into an island. The area around it is dependent on the Goat River water levels, and that will flood every year. But that inner island that we kind of created is dependent on the backwater flooding and the Libby Dam releases. So that will only flood every few years, and we're hoping if it does flood every year, then the water goes down enough and we start to get back some of those more difficult wetlands, like the mud flatty type wetlands that are heavily dependent on that wide fluctuation of flooding. Like I said, I'll ramble forever if you don't cut me off. So maybe we should have like a virtual hook.
Emily, that's your cue to keep jumping in.
Sarah Marsden, are you still in the chat, or would you like, I can read the question if you're not?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, thanks. Sorry, I had to just step away briefly, but really enjoyed your presentation and really great work that you're doing. So my hands up to you. I just had a question about the original cause of, and I am sorry if I missed it. There was a lot in the presentation and really good analysis and summary. So just what the cause of the damage to the wetland was, it was requiring the restoration, and if your nation has any recommendations in terms of management types of decisions in the future on how to prevent such damage.
Initially, it was a lot of the dams and dikes that were put in place that disconnected, and trying to turn this from, like I said, floodplain wetlands to nesting habitat for migratory birds. They dug a lot of ditches between all of those historical wetlands, and then they would put in a culvert with a valve on it that you could open up that would drain that entire area through one little point, because it was all connected with ditching. So in disabling that ditching, we restored the rims of those wetlands. So they act like tide pools again. And that ditching, we actually turned into little wetlands themselves. And we restored those rims at a point where they become spillways instead of just straight ditches. So that when the water comes in, the first wetlands will fill to capacity, and then they'll spill over into the next, and then so on and so forth until the area becomes full. It's like, I kind of lost my train of thought. So yeah, but that was a lot of the damage that was done to the area, was connecting all of these wetlands and putting the dams in and disconnecting it from the freshet flooding, so that these inner areas, and also the loss in capacity to maintain all of the infrastructure out there. You have to replace all of the water control structures. You have to rebuild dams. You have to maintain the pumps. Those pumps alone can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $7,000 each in electricity just to run and fill these areas. And it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to fill these areas to capacity. And because of those head cuts that rip through these areas, the water level now in the springtime is below the inlets of the pumps, so we can't pump during then. And when the water comes up high enough, that's when nesting season is, and we can't pump during then because then we interfere with that, and we have to wait until after that. And usually the water's gone back down, and we don't get enough water back until, you know, the autumn season where the waters come back up a little bit, and that sometimes is only like at the end of October. Some years we'd be turning those pumps on now, and then within a couple of weeks we run into winter where we have to shut them off. So that's like almost like a perfect storm to kind of degrade these areas. And it's not, you can't really narrow it down just to a few key pieces. You have to, you know, like I said, learn those systems and see what's actually happening with everything in order to address and do as best you can to fix and return it back.
Thank you.
Amy, do you want to go ahead with your second question?
Oh, thank you. If there isn't a bunch of others, I'm curious if you're aware, or if anyone on the call is aware of the wetlands being constructed in the Lardo Valley and the head of Kootenay Lake have this type of restoration approach to it, or if you know if they're using any of these principles.
If a lot of them are starting to use it, if Tom Beibighauser is involved. He's been here since the beginning. We work together and design all of this stuff, and we've kind of evolved our techniques as we're, like I said, from year to year as we go on. And LKB is starting to be involved with other restoration projects that are ongoing within the area and some within the traditional area itself, if that makes sense. So it is starting to happen. There are other people that do a lot of the wetlands restoration work that are involved with, you know, with a lot of what we've been doing in some capacity. We've helped out with other people that are doing the work, and we're also trying to guide that through. BCWF has a really awesome project program, the Wetlands Institute, that they put on every year, where they bring a lot of these techniques and they start teaching them to people that have wetland projects throughout the province. There's I think there used to be a couple of shorter ones, and then there's a long 7-day one. So.
If there are any up in the area, there is the Conservation Service in this area, so you can apply for funding there. It's not in the Creston area. We're hoping to get them in too, but just one funding source up this way.
Yeah.
All right, I wanted to bring the questions back at Jim for the next little while, if that's okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so Lori Barkley, are you still on the call? Would you like to post your question?
Yeah, you mentioned something briefly about the reintroduction of salmon and which salmon could be reintroduced and survivability. So I was just hoping you could talk a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, in the distribution, there's evidence that there's only a certain species of salmon that would make it to the certain destination. The Chinook, the sockeye, and steelhead, they were able to make it to the Arrow Lakes area, south of Revelstoke. And they were accessing streams like the Salmo River and Slocan. They would access those streams. But the Chinook were able to traverse through those rapids. And now that we have dams, there is no rapids there, so there's no real way to segregate those fish species, because fish ladder technology does not discriminate against one or another. So that poses a question of adding too many salmon into an area that had a natural selection process that didn't allow that many nutrients. And that would be evidenced by both Columbia and Windermere Lakes being originally oligotrophic. There is some eutrophication in Windermere, but that's due to external environment pieces. But aside from that, the problem posed is, do we, if we let all species of salmon access the upper Columbia, then that will change the ecology of the upper Columbia system to the Revelstoke, to the point of Revelstoke. So that's kind of the reason why I brought that up, is that it's an issue that we have to really contemplate. And as Ktunaxa say, is we got to chew on it so that we can understand it and swallow it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, now we have Shauna Ramirez. If you'd like to amend, sorry if I butchered your name. Would you like to ask your question next to Jim?
Oh, thanks. Hi, Jim Kisukukits. I wanted to ask you if you know much about the traditional uses of Wassa Lake, which is currently really being trashed. And there's a group of us that are very, very concerned about what's happening here at Wassa Lake. And I just wondered if you would like to say anything more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a piece of the creation legend that is about Wassa. And that name Wassa in Ktunaxa is horsetail.
Yeah, we got lots of horsetail weeds here, right?
Yes, and horsetail in that story, horsetail was a hero because he helped save Skincoats, the coyote, from drowning. He was on the bank and he was able to pull Skincoats out of the water before Yawunik could eat him. So that place is very important because of those species, like the species that are identified in the area actually supply, the usage for that area. That was like an extremely important area for the groundwater. Like it's an aquifer style groundwater source. And that's how there's those little, that's how the lake gets its water levels, is through that connection between the Kootenai River and the lake itself. And then there's also the upstream or the uphill springs that also contribute. And that would be, small tributaries. Yeah, there's other stories, but I just don't know them. And I'm pretty sure they would provide even more importance for that area. But and it was in terms of, for the Ktunaxa, a very important travel and camping area because of the topography of the area. And there was lots of game as well. The deer and elk were through that area as used extensively for the grasslands.
Jim, can I add to your comments?
Sure.
I think one of the important things for all of us to recognize and all of us to realize too is that when Yawunik was killed and when Mutsun, right, created the human beings, the responsibilities were for all of us, right? And so often, and I want to encourage you. It's probably going to cause a problem. But I want to encourage you to consider the Ktunaxa Nation Council and reaching out to educate as well when you are coming across these issues that are happening in these different areas, because we have a vast homelands, and because of colonization over many generations, we get caught to certain areas, right? And so I think it's part of our self-development. And for those of you that are in funding and that are in, responsibilities for, making things happen and governance, to recognize that some of those systems of governance has actually disabled us from certain relationships and responsibilities. And so part of this, the reason for this, is to rebuild some of those relationships. And so I just want to encourage you when you're concerned about these things, to reach out to folks, because as soon as you said Wassa, I was like, oh, my brother just moved over there. He's the director of TKL. You should talk to Don Sam. And I'm probably going to get in trouble with that, but I'm like, reach out to people, because there's a lot for us to figure out, right? And so we need each other. And I think that, for myself and how I've heard Joe Pierre talk about it, right? It's the human beings that were created. And so we all have some acts, right, to carry out. We can't do this by ourselves. We need those relationships to help us to be able to do these things, but we need to be Indigenous-led. So sometimes we need that knowledge to be able to take back and figure out, okay, what do we need to do here, right? So it's not just, oh, we need to do this and this is how. We need to have the conversation of, oh, this is happening. And then we need to think about it as Ktunaxa and go, okay, so what can we do about that? Because that's in our creation story. A problem is presented and then we go back and what can we do about that? Oh, okay, we can do this. Sorry, Emily, I jumped in there, but I just wanted to.
No, thank you. That was a great addition. My last question is for Norm, and it's my question. So I was just curious if you received any pushback from the agricultural community during the wetlands restoration project. And if so, has there been any learning experiences between coexisting with industry, and has it been seen across these fields that we equally rely on this land? And yeah, that's my question.
There hasn't been any, because these projects are all on LKB bandlands, Lower Kootenai bandlands, and they've always been areas of wetland. So that's why we've been able to learn so much from them, because there's a lot of natural features that disappear in other areas that are used for agriculture. These areas end up getting, these wetlands are filled in, all the high points are brought down and leveled out, and all of these natural features end up disappearing. So in having, examples of this stuff, like Tom's baby cows started putting in these compounds with Ducks Unlimited 40 years ago. He spent like the past decade and a little bit taking them out and trying to restore these areas. And there's been a lot of firsts in his career in this project because all of those natural features still existed, and that modified and evolved the techniques in restoring them. So with the agricultural community, there hasn't been, because LQB, it is reserved land for the band. People that do lease out see the project and what's going on here, and they're actually we're starting to incorporate some of that within, say, like some of the Timothy hay fields that we lease out and people grow Timothy hay on. There's areas where there are those they're problematic for farmers. It's always too wet, and they can't, they usually get to about one crop of it every 3 or 4 years, because that's when it's dry enough to go and do that. And we're starting to incorporate some of this restoration in that area and build ephemeral wetlands that function, that are like I said, they're extremely important in the beginning of the year. And they bring a lot of those early emergent species of plants and bugs, invertebrates, animals, and they help support them at that time. And then they just turn back to dry land over the year. And with every acre of wetland we create, we could make about an acre to an acre and a half of drier land. So that makes it a bit more area that they can get a crop off of. And it also adds valuable early habitat back to those fields. So we're starting to see that as well. With the middle wetland that we have, it's going to be extremely hard to reconnect that back to the system. So there's agricultural pumps that actually drain some of the ditches for the agricultural fields in the beginning of the year. There's a ditch that we need to realign, and that goes to that wetland. We can turn a valve and have, instead of pumping all of that water directly back out into the rivers, we can flood these wetland areas and have it pre-treated before it seeps back into the system. And these areas were chosen because they're chock full of narrow leaf cattail, which is an invasive form of cattail in the valley here. And it's basically taken over the area. It's just that and canary reed. So yeah, I'm getting the thumbs up, getting the hook. But yeah, we're looking at incorporating restoration work within agriculture so that it's beneficial for both.
Thank you for answering that. Our next question is from Candace Baziki.
Hi, thanks for that, Norm. I really can't wait to go out and actually see it on the ground someday soon. I was curious about what you're seeing in terms of impacts, positive impacts to species that are more visible than copepods, maybe. Like, I know you mentioned turtles in a recent presentation, and I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of impacts to other critters out there.
We're seeing a lot more diverse plant colonies come back because we're adding that variation to the bottom of these wetlands. We're seeing, like, there's a lot of listed invertebrates come back. There's a ladybug, I forget which one it was, but there's also, like, I think it's the 9-spotted dragonfly. That's just, you can't go a few feet without one hitting you in the face out there now. It's just everywhere. And there's a lot more, sorry, sorry, it's not COVID, it's just spittle. I inhaled a bit of tea. So, but there's a lot more ducks and geese coming back. We've had sandhill cranes return back and nest in the area. There's a lot more heron activity going on. We're monitoring an old heron rookery along the goat that was in the area to see if that reestablishes. There's tons of different wildlife return. I've seen the biggest grizzly track I've ever seen. It's about 21 centimeters wide, which is about 8.5 inches for the imperial or metric, whoever chooses to follow what. Yeah, and there's deer, elk, a few moose within the valley. We're designing deeper wetlands to give more of that sodium-rich plant life for things like the moose that do like to use it. Yeah, we're seeing larger populations of almost everything return. So, and the key is to be able to continue that monitoring on, because a lot of what happens is these restoration projects get done and then they get looked at for a couple of years and then they kind of get forgotten. But my goal is to eventually have a 20-year look at the place, and then I can see all of those flood regimes and how the area is really being affected and the longer term effects of the work we've done and whether it's beneficial or not, and adjust from there. Because we've recorded everything we've done so that we can go back, or if I win the lottery tomorrow and disappear, somebody else can look at the work and the projects and see like, oh yeah, this is what was done here. This is why they did it. And so it can be a continual thing. And that's another Indigenous perspective, is long-term thinking about these projects.
Thanks so much.
Lori Jo, would you like to post your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the great work that you guys are doing. I was just wondering if the beavers play a role in this Indigenous-led restoration work.
Yeah, there's beavers upstream within the woods along the south channel of the Goat River, which we're actually trying to reopen and have a third of the flow return to that channel. We've got all the permits in place. We're just waiting on a few other things, and then we'll be re-wetting that channel, which is excellent spawning habitat, and it'll help the beavers and such up there. But these floodplains are really wide open areas, and you're dealing with really low flow, high volume water at these points. So it's harder for beavers to establish their dams and do natural wetland creation work on these areas with.
La Rochelle Connie, would you like to post your question?
Hi, I'm just trying to figure out the buttons on my cell phone. Thank you for the presentation. I love learning about what's happening in the area. I'm wondering, does the Ktunaxa, or do you do any work with any of the local environmental groups, or if an environmental group wanted to facilitate a project, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, we do a little bit of work. I sit on a few different boards for some of the environmental groups around the area. Also, those projects, usually we're starting to be approached about involving and being involved with some of them, like during the design phases or the construction phases. And yeah, because we're starting to actually show the work that we're doing, we're starting to get that interest more and more. And then eventually, our goal is to have a lot of people knowing these techniques and applying them where they're applicable. Like each site's going to be very different. Like say like here on the reserve, we're further south. We have problems with adding water to our wetlands, whereas the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area is up near the delta where the Kootenai connects. And they have the problem where they have to actually pump water out of the wetlands because they get too much. So just like a 10-kilometer difference means, different type of restoration work.
Norm, I'm just going to jump in too, and I don't mean to put anybody else on. I have this habit of calling on people, but this is to answer your question a little bit, Connie. This is part of the reason why we're hosting this webinar, right? Is to support Indigenous-led efforts and to better situate the potential relationships. Because often what happens, and my experience as a researcher, as a Ktunaxa researcher, as a Ktunaxa scholar, is often people are ready with the answers, right, to us and for us and upon us, without ever understanding where we are coming from, what structures work for us, what protocols are important, right, why we do the things that we do the way we do them. And so part of these webinars is just to start the conversation, right, and then for like, there's a couple of groups on here, for example, that, I don't work for Living Lakes Canada, I'm a consultant. And so I'm supporting this work because I know that we need to do this pre-engagement work. We need to better understand each other to be able to do good work without perpetuating colonialism, perpetuating imperialism, right? And to actually do things that are actually going to help the environment and take forward, right? Take the lead of Indigenous people's knowledges, right? Because we actually know what we're doing. Part of what I loved, Norm, about your presentation is seeing all the big cats, right? The big, right? We have people that get trained in those big, heavy machinery equipment stuff, and people just tend to see them as, oh, they are doing mining. And it's like, no, they actually can have a role in doing this kind of really positive restoration work as well. And so it's understanding that we're a changing people, right? So our knowledge holders are much younger and they might not look like what you think we look like, right? Because we're actually perpetuating forward. And we have lots to offer, but it means getting to know each other. And so part of that, like I said, is that pre-engagement. So I just want to, did you want to say something there, Natalie? Or are you just shaking your hands? Okay. I just wanted to jump in there quick because we're getting to the last part of our session this afternoon. And we've got 79 people left. I just wanted to go through, because the closing is just as important as the opening in terms of protocols. And quite often we get enough time at the very beginning of meetings to follow protocol, but then everybody kind of leaves. And that's not actually our way. We actually go full circle, literally full circle, to be able to close off things so that we can leave things, right? And then we can take things with us and we can leave other things, right? And that we have those sorts of connections. So one thing I would like to ask is, so usually what I do when I'm facilitating these groups is we'll go around and ask everybody, tell me one thing you learned, one thing that's staying for you in your mind that you're going to take with you, that you're going to use. But because there's 79 of you, I'm going to ask for the first 5 people who have not chatted, who have not asked a question, and who don't know me, if you would put your hands up, and then Emily will, or put your name in the chat. I know, Natalie, I know. And part of the reason we do this is for inclusion, not just inclusion, but connection, right? So that people have a chance to put something forward. Carol has to run. Anybody who doesn't need to run. So Catherine Richter, you go ahead first, and you're just going to name one thing that you learned, one thing you're going to take with you, a gratitude that you're thankful for. And then we need 4 more people.
So I learned today that I have more to learn from this type of engagement than to, provide from myself. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So thank you.
We're looking for more. 4 more people. I'm gonna have to scroll, I guess. Come on, don't be shy. Come on.
You may have to change to Michelle to people who don't know you.
No, let's see, somebody who hasn't spoke yet. Oh, we've got some people putting in their comments into the chat. Come on, this is participatory. Eartha, Diane. Okay, Eartha first and then Diane.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much. It gives me such joy to be able to join you and just learn more about Indigenous worldviews. And it's so exciting to hear about projects that you are leading, and I fully support everything you are doing.
Thank you. Diane.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diane Giroux. I'm voting from, I'm with Treaty 8 Tribal Corporation up in the Northwest Territories. And I apologize, I was a little bit late calling in today, but I just had made a comment about really being intrigued, about the restoration project that was presented. It's of course very different geography than where I come from, but we do have a lot of lakes in our area, with the biggest ones being the Great Slave Lake and the Great Bear Lake. For those that are familiar, I wanted to provide a lake context. And we have a lot of fresh water up in the Northwest Territories, a lot of inland lakes, not a couple, but we've got many key rivers as well. But I was intrigued for the fact that it's been a huge challenge for us to adapt to changes that have been happening within our Slave River Delta system over the years. People don't realize it, but one of the key impacts to our wetlands and delta area had been the building of the Bennett Dam. Right, it affected our water levels throughout the whole watershed. And, our elders speak to the changes that have happened within the Delta system, with us, water levels are of huge concern as well, not just water quantity, but water quality, because, the Delta system cleans our watershed. It's a hugely important process that has been greatly reduced. And just wanted, like I said, I was very glad to participate and gain knowledge, and was very intrigued that traditional knowledge was playing a huge role in guiding that restoration project. So in my language, Marcy Cho, thank you.
Marcy Cho, Diane, thank you so much. Can you share who a group can contact for looking at projects, etc. together? So I think that would be Living Lakes Canada, because this is their initiative that they're starting to think about and putting forward, right? Indigenous peoples led, into Indigenous peoples knowledge led projects. So I would say you're gonna all start getting in touch with Emily and Kat and Nicole there. Anybody else? We've got room for 2 more people. How about some guys? We've heard from some women. Let's have some. Yes? Okay.
I'm like, it's not me, I swear.
I'd like to say thanks to my son for doing his presentation on the wetlands. I learned a little bit about it, and I'm glad to also hear that the animals are returning to the wetlands. and also learning more about what you do, what do you do with your job, how you work protecting the environment. Huh? Protecting the environment. Protecting the environment, and how the water flows help with the wetlands. I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Lorraine.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for participating. There was a couple, so Casey Moran can't speak out loud because it's midnight in Scotland. Lucky guy. And his wife is asleep. However, I want to say thank you to the organizers and presenters. It was interesting to learn about the issue of head cuts having the potential to drain wetlands. That's, yeah. And then Clayton Bradley, are you still on here, or are you, did you leave?
I'm here.
You wanna?
Yeah, I just, those words just really ring true. And I think it's just something just for everyone to just keep in the back of their mind. And when we're sharing in these types of groups, or in groups that maybe, don't know as much about, environmental processes and how things work. And I think there's a lot of education out there still that's needed. And the biggest thing we can do is just do our part and care for the land.
Thanks. And COTR, speaking of education, Environmental Science 101. You want to turn on your camera? You got a comment in there. Show us who you are. There they are, all up at the Aboriginal gathering place. One of you want to say how did you come up with this comment? Anybody? You're going to have to unmute yourself. You don't know how to do that? Okay. Oh.
It says they're unmuted, so maybe their microphone's not working.
Yeah, I don't think your microphone's working. That's too bad. Okay, Keith Story has some final words, but we did get from COTR. It says water connects everything, connects spiritually, traditions, trade, and knowledge. That's what they're walking away from. So go ahead, Keith, and then you'll be our last before we.
All right, thanks, Michelle, for facilitating, and thanks to Jim and Norm. And what I pulled from this was a reminder to go back to some larger value systems. I definitely get bogged down with details when I do any reviews or any of my own work. So going back to some of these stories and recognizing the emotional connection there is with land instead of treating it as a confined system, something that I got to keep coming back to, as well as the incredible work that's done with the wetland restoration. Yeah, just stepping back. And one thing I really liked, I think it was one of Norm's final statements, was that the restoration goes beyond just a couple of years check-in, and we see that with some of these wetland projects where a couple of years later, they look into it and then it kind of declines, and then it's up to another initiative or another committee or another group to revitalize it. So hearing that there's interest in looking at this wetland as a larger system for decades is lovely to hear.
All right, thank you. Just because there's somebody here from Scotland, I want to tell you his little story. So when I turned 50, I went for my dream vacation. I ended up over in Scotland. I wanted to go visit Loch Ness Monster because I thought maybe they were cousins to Yawunik. Yeah, I went to Loch Ness and was like, hey, cousin, didn't show up though. Anyways, I hope you get a smile out of that. Okay, so, there we go. Can you see my screen? Can you see this PowerPoint? Yeah, okay, good. So this is where we are now. And so I want to thank Nicole over there in communications for keeping us on track. And Emily, way to jump 2 feet into a new position. Applied reconciliation, here you are. You're in it. Kat, always thank you so much for all your support. Jim and Norm for going first. And part of the reason is because of where the headwaters are in the Ktunaxa homelands, and because of our creation story, how we talk about that creation story. And so next we have the Secwepemc Knowledge Relationships with Wayne Christian and Robin Lobman. That's on November 2nd, and you'll note the time. So for those of you in Pacific time, is 12:30, and for Mountain time, it will be 1:30. I want to also thank all of you for making the time, taking the time, right? Making space and place to have this conversation, to start this conversation. It's by no means the end, it's just the beginning of the conversation. How you carry it forward is up to you. And so that's all I have. Kat, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. I don't have anything else either. I'm just so grateful that you were able to guide us in this conversation today, and that our hearts are more open than they were when we started, and that they continue to stay open. So thank you. And thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Jim and Norm. It was really amazing. Thank you.
Okay, well, then that, look at us being done on ahead of time. Hey? All right, that's all we've got. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. And in the meantime, have a great week. Take good care. Go out and visit your waterways and say hi.
And we'll look at everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks a lot.
Who's to get to cook in a